Welcome back to the Creating Value in Schools podcast with me, Liz Worthen. And today it's wonderful to be joined by education and mental health consultant, author and podcaster, Nicola Harvey. And Nicola, you've been a senior leader in schools and now you work with schools delivering training and supporting in different ways connected to mental health and well-being. So I'm really pleased to have you here so we can delve into some questions around how we can support staff in schools to thrive and be well. So how about we start with just tell us a little bit about some of the needs and priorities that are coming up for you working with schools around staff mental health and well-being at the moment.
Hi, Liz. It's great to be here. So thanks for having me. And yes, so lots going on in schools. And as we're recording this, it's towards the end of the year, the end of the academic year. So there's a lot of tired teachers and children. But a lot of things that I'm working on are anxiety, stress, burnout, the transition, particularly the transition from year 6 into secondary or key stage 1 into key stage 2, and helping children as well as staff navigate through this change. My background is in special educational needs, so I have a real passion for working with neurodivergent children as well as supporting the teachers, because as we know, there's not enough training, particularly in the teacher training, when it comes to working with children with special educational needs. And of course, there are children with protected characteristics and teachers with protected characteristics, particularly in terms of race, ethnicity, that are experiencing discrimination. And so I'm going in a lot and delivering training, wellbeing workshops, one-to-one reflective practice. But one of the common themes that I'm seeing at the moment is burnout. Burnout is something that seems to be happening quite a lot.
Interesting. That really echoes things like the latest Teacher Wellbeing Index really pointed out actually maybe particularly senior leaders, head teachers, really at risk of burnout. But it'd be quite good, Nicola, because I feel like burnout is a term I hear a lot. What does it really mean?
Yeah, and it's a really good question because you're right. We do hear burnout and it's used quite a lot in language, but burnout itself is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. And it can be caused by if we have excessive or prolonged stress over a period of time. And it's often related to work. And, stress every now and then is absolutely fine. We all experience stress. And sometimes, if we have a day when we're not experiencing any sort of rumbling, it can be a bit boring, but it's all on a continuum. If we are repeatedly experiencing stress, anxiety, and overwhelm due to workload, work-life imbalance, staff dynamics, and things going on within the environment, it can actually result in burnout. So burnout can be overwhelming. An individual can be quite cynical, ineffective in their work, and it's really difficult at times, particularly when you're in busy school environments, to spot the signs and actually recognize it in yourself. Burnout can also be seen as an iceberg, and this is what I love to use when I'm delivering trainings or doing one-to-ones with teachers. And beneath the surface, we have this rumblings of anxiety or doing additional marking or, just feeling a little bit tired or insomnia. And we don't see this. There's that inner critic, those voices, that sense of guilt for saying no and having that presenteeism when we're feeling poorly. However, above the iceberg, what we do see is the teacher or educator who's overwhelmed, who has those mood swings, who is visibly tired, visibly exhausted, and needs a break but can't, and is just pushing through until they snap. So really, really important to be recognizing the signs early and practicing self-care. But, often people don't realize until it's too late, particularly if you're working in a busy school environment.
What is it? I think I can imagine some reasons, but what's making schools or education such a difficult place, or why is it at risk to burnout?
Definitely related to work-related stress. You mentioned the Teacher Wellbeing Index, and the most recent one, there are, so many different stats. 46% of staff experiencing insomnia, 50% saying staff culture impacts well-being, so many different things, 77% with symptoms of poor mental health. So when you're in that environment, you do get sucked in. You're constantly on the go. There are schools that are doing incredible things. We have the Department for Education and Public Health England's whole school approach to mental health and well-being, where it starts with the leadership, and there's all different elements that you can do to support whole school mental health and well-being. However, often it is a tick box. And when you are on the ground, teachers are overwhelmed by workload, by culture. And there is this pressure, this Ofsted pressure to be perfect, to get good grades. And when I deliver training, I often show a video of young people and staff navigating through a secondary school environment. And it has statements from Ofsted about this school will perform well, blah, blah, blah. And really, you're not actually looking at the individuals in their eyes to actually acknowledging what's going on. So there's a lot. And it's also government. We've obviously changed governments recently. There's a lot of funding cuts. There's a lot of pressure, special educational needs, a lot of confusion now around EHCPs, whether that's going to continue. So I could go on, but all of this is impacting staff well-being, particularly, and parents as well. So parents will have their own set of needs, their own set of values, understandably, and will want the best for their children. But this is an added stress for staff as well. So, and again, it can work both ways. I'm not saying all parents are stressing teachers out. Absolutely not. But we need more inclusive communication, compassionate leadership to make sure that children and staff feel seen in the environment. But it's systemic. There's a lot of things going on within school environments, and the education system at the moment is quite rigid. And again, if you're trying to navigate through that, particularly if you are a neurodivergent teacher, it can be very difficult to unpack that. Hence, teachers are leaving. There's high levels of burnout, so yeah, sorry to give such a cynical answer.
But it's true, isn't it? There is a lot going on, as you say, a lot of those pressures, and whether it's Ofsted, funding, wanting to do the best, and schools doing a lot of work to pick up the pieces, and a lot of challenges in society broadly. So there's a lot going on. And yeah, you mentioned there, for example, also maybe teachers with neurodivergent characteristics too. And you're also saying, in the work that you do a lot of work thinking about race and discrimination. So tell us a bit about how that adds an extra lens.
Yeah, so if you are a teacher from a global majority or Black background, you will experience a different working life. There's not many within the profession, very small percentages, particularly at senior leadership level. And the education system is basically a very white structural system and doesn't allow for the complexities of race, ethnicity, diversity, and inclusion. So if you are an individual that comes from a Black background, particularly, there are extra things that are into play. There are textbooks that are quite dated with racist terms that can impact how an individual is experiencing, that lesson. There are microaggressions. Where are you from? Where are you really from? Those sort of subtle comments that can impact, again, the individuals in terms of their emotional health and well-being. There's a lot of misunderstandings, and we're finding again that many teachers are leaving the profession, which is leaving Black and brown students with not much representation. And representation matters. It's so important. However, what we're finding is that is a phrase that often gets bandied around, and the systems and structures are not in place to actually support that representation. So, for instance, in my case, I was a Black SEND teacher and in a private school at the time, and that's how I started out my career before I moved into mainstream. The only other Black member of staff on the team, and the only other person of colour, was the chef and her assistant, and they were fantastic. They were Jamaican, so they'd often give me a little bit of extra shout out to all the Jamaicans there, and brilliant, just lovely. But what I did notice that when I made it into middle management, when I wanted to create changes, I worked very hard. I was often in first, often stayed late, and I was put through the mill. So I really, really worked really hard. but it wasn't always recognised. It was recognised by the parents and recognised, and made it to middle management, got some additional responsibility. But I noticed my peers were getting those extra opportunities, those extra leg ups. And at the time, there wasn't as many incredible organisations out there to support Black and brown members of teaching teams. And whilst there still is, we still have to go back into our schools, which are predominantly white. So a lot of teachers are leaving the profession. Children are not seeing individuals that look like them in teaching roles. So when we have things like EHCP, special educational needs diagnosis, or just general behaviour management, those complexities that comes with diversity and race and understanding those cultural nuances are not always taken on board. So I have a real passion, because often people think of mental health as one thing and race and ethnicity and global majority is something separate. I often bring them together, because if you are experiencing a lot of racism in the school environment, that will impact your mental health. There's no two ways about it. And we know that the way in which children from diverse backgrounds are treated are very different than their white counterparts. Obviously that behaviour management systems need to be in place, which is fair enough, but it's really important that we are treating everyone in a fair and equitable manner, and it's inclusive. And unfortunately, not in every single case, we're hearing particularly things like Afro hair, and I could go on, but it's really important that we're acknowledging that, because it does have an impact on mental health and well-being for staff as well as students.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Is it the Halo Trust that's doing great work? Yeah, doing really good work around the issue of hair.
We have World Afro Day coming up in September as well. There's a lot of things that are really raising the profile. But again, we have school uniform policies that are not inclusive. We've got children being sent home for reasons, where they're not being acknowledged, the cultural nuances. So there are things that are in place, but it's the individuals behind the scenes that are not actually always, not everyone. I'm not putting everyone with the same brush or whatever the phrase is, but it's important that we keep learning and doing the work. Yeah.
And on keep learning, we just take a moment as well to check in on terminology, talking about race, Black, people of color, because I feel like there has been a shift, hasn't there? There was a time when, for example, we would talk about Black, minority, ethnic staff or students. That's using that word minority we feel isn't so helpful these days. So we'd rather talk about Black, global majority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You say that, and I totally agree. But unfortunately, in the many texts, it still says BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic, or Black, minority ethnic, particularly in research texts. And I think because it's quite a research terminology, but in day-to-day terminology, it's more correct and more inclusive to state Black or global majority. And people go, what does global majority mean? And global majority is basically when you look at the world at large and you see individuals that look like me, individuals that may be South Asian or East Asian, we're in the majority globally. And often when we are in countries, we're perceived as the minority. But if you think about globally, we are in the majority. So that is why that term has been brought in, to basically just have a bit more of an inclusive lens. You will still hear minority ethnic, you'll still hear phrases in that term. And, I think it will take a while for it to be phased out and replaced by stating Black people or global majority, which is correct terminology. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. That's really helpful. And yeah, as you've kind of intimated, a lot of this is about culture, the decisions that individuals can make and decisions within the school. So what steps can school leaders take to take care of their staff?
Yeah, I think listening to understand. I love things like yoga, mindfulness, the whole shebang. I love all of that. But it doesn't work for everyone. Booking a day, a wellbeing day where staff get to choose in a wellbeing activity is not going to solve the systemic issues when it comes to mental health and wellbeing, particularly for those individuals with protected characteristics. So really, really key that we are looking at it from a whole school approach. So there are things like PERMA, which is a positive psychology model developed by Martin Seligman. And PERMA stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And this is a nice one to adopt because, yes, we have things like the whole school approach to mental health and well-being, which I like to call the donuts because it's got 8 key areas. And there's other different models, and I'm going to speak about one that's more personal in a moment. But PERMA is a really nice positive psychology model that you can use with both children as well as adults. And of course, it's evidence-based. So positive emotion, and I often take out the positive because all emotions are valid. Obviously we want people to feel joyful and be their best selves, but we have to acknowledge and validate that some people are not in a great place. Some people are experiencing burnout. So the P stands for positive emotion. So allowing people to express themselves in a way that feels right for them and regulate their emotions, be it through zones of regulations for children and young people or various other means, but having safe spaces to express our emotions. And if it's not within the school environment, elsewhere, so making sure staff feel that they can. Engagement. So finding things, I encourage staff and schools to find things where people can have a sense of engagement, have a sense of flow. And this is being lost in the moment doing an activity that means something to them. So it could be that they have a wellbeing group or they have a dance club or something, but something that is engaging and sort of takes them away from that mindset of work, work, work. And they just get lost in it, whether it's creativity, art, but something that's not work related, but quite engaging. That's the E. R, relationships. Relationships are key. We are human beings. We are connected to other individuals in every sense. We're not here to live alone. And although it's nice to have that sense of me time, it's good to connect and communicate with others that are on the same level and can be compassionate and caring. So really important that we are seeking out relationships that are healthy, supportive, and can work both ways. It might be in the form of a mentor, it might be a coach, it might be a peer, but really important to have that sense of community. M for meaning, so finding a purpose. So finding something, this might be out of work, this might be in work, but also reevaluating, why did you want to become a teacher in the first place? What was it that brought you into education? Because that is your purpose, that's your meaning. And if you're going, oh, well, I don't know, really unpack that and really dig a bit deeper. Because if your heart's not in it, that will impact your mental health and emotional well-being, and also the children and the community that you're serving. And then last but not least, accomplishment is the A in PERMA. And accomplishment, we often, as teachers, celebrate children's successes. I know when I was a teacher, we'd have like celebration assembly, we'd have Star of the Week. But what about adopting that for staff as well? Really important that we're making sure that staff feel seen and heard and, are celebrated for a good piece of work, and also celebrate making mistakes, having that growth mindset, accomplishment. Oh God, I messed up, but this is what I did instead. Those sorts of things are incredible. So that's the PERMA model. There is another one that I'll talk about in briefly, but yeah, that's the PERMA model.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and I've heard about that before, but it's really nice to hear about it in more detail again, because I feel that's something, it's quite practical. It's something you can apply in small ways on a daily basis, isn't it? Because that's the thing, it doesn't all have to be, I don't know, big interventions or something radical, but actually taking some time to have a chat, have a talk, listen to somebody. Oh yeah, even sometimes, yeah, let's talk about why we did start doing this and why we wanted to be here, and let's reconnect with that perhaps, and that might help us take a breath and move onward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Just briefly talk to you about the other one.
Yes, please.
So Dr. Chandra Daunton Smith wrote a book called Sacred Rest. And within this, she highlighted 7 areas of rest. And often when we think, particularly if we're in the teaching profession, we feel guilty for having a break, for having a rest. But Dr. Chandra said, rest is a form of resistance. Rest is really important for our emotional health and well-being. Rest should be normalized. Taking, not just when it's school holidays, but mapping out our days, going, okay, I'm working from this time to this time. what am I going to do before work? What am I going to do after work? You know, how can I bring embody rest into my daily life? But her 7 forms of rest are physical. So this is obviously like resting the body, resting, you know, being in that state of pause and easing. We've got mental. And again, when we are working in school environments, our minds are so busy, we're on the go. So having things that you can just offload, whether it's journaling or talking to a friend or just letting go. So really, really important. We've got emotional as well, and I spoke about that within the PERMA side, when we spoke about the PERMA model, you know, having a way of regulating your emotions and really sort of recognizing those. She's also got social rest, which I really like. And I think it just acknowledges this sense of having a balance between me time, but also connecting with others that you're have good sort of positive relationships with. Sensory is the next one. And sensory is, I love sensory because often, again, coming from a special educational needs background, we had these like sensory toolkits and things that I'd use with the kids. But how often as adults do we go, gosh, I'm so overstimulated? How often
We don't know. That's let's find some nice smells, some relaxing smells.
Exactly. So this is why I love it. And I have a podcast about this particular thing. It's a solo episode where I'll go through each of these. The last 2, so we've got creative rest. And creative rest could be a form of art therapy, could be whatever you like, doodling. It could just be taking a break completely from being creative, but finding a way to be creative in a way that works for you. Because again, this will ignite parts of the brain to help you rest. And then last is spiritual. And it's not saying that you need to go out and be religious. It is connected to this sense of meaning, you know, this sense of find something that means something to you and really have a purpose and a drive. So whether it is a spiritual connection, just finding something that's greater than yourselves to really make a difference.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I love that.
I love it.
And yeah, and it just helps us think, it helps you think about rest in different ways, doesn't it? Yeah, rest doesn't just have, well, sleep is very important too, but that's a different matter. But rest doesn't just have to be sitting down. It could be being with someone you enjoy being with, or it could be baking. That might be your creative rest, or cooking. Yeah, all of these things can actually help you.
Yeah, it humanizes things because obviously we have lots of whole school approaches like PERMA or things that the government have brought in, but this is on a personal level. This could be on a school level as well. This could be a leader bringing this in. But if you wanted to take ownership for your own emotional health and well-being, this is a lovely way of actually embodying rest in different forms. So yeah.
Thank you. And Nicola, something else that you have been doing quite a bit with some schools recently is also work around mental health first aid.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that? What is it and how might that be helpful?
Yeah, sure. So mental health first aid, I am one of the instructors, so I'm an associate trainer. And I love it because I focus on the youth model and I do a lot of work with schools, with individuals. And it's basically because we know that waiting lists for CAMS and other mental health services are ridiculously long. And we know that early intervention is key. So that first early support can help that young person recover and also adults as well. So mental health first aid itself is a way of early intervention. It's like physical first aid, but it's spotting the signs of anxiety, low mood, and other conditions, and working with that young person to create an action plan. And obviously, if they are at high risk of, you know, suicide or self-harm, then we need to get the urgent professional support and care. But it's early intervention, so it's meeting that child where they're at and giving them some practical tools and strategies, but also signposting them because we don't know everything. Particularly if you are an educator, you're not a mental health professional. So it may be that you're giving them that listening ear, holding space, and then signposting them to the correct sort of service or individual, but making sure that it's almost connecting the dots. But it's valid for 3 years, and then you can do refresher training for another 3 years. So similar to physical first aid, but I deliver that training online and in person in Sussex or London. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I remember when a while back we had Josephine Smith on the podcast, and she's a head teacher, and mental health first aid was something that they'd invested in at her school. And she said yes, and while they sort of did it to support the students, they actually found then it was also really beneficial for staff, the staff members themselves. It enabled them maybe to recognize things happening with them and to regulate and take rest when they needed to, and also then to support other staff members as well. So
No, I love it. The training itself, although it's not therapy and becoming a mental health first aid, it's not therapy, it's therapeutic because you end up reflecting on your own childhood or your own mental health. And I think what's really, really important once you've done the training is to seek community. So what I'm going to be developing as well is sort of like reflective practice for mental health first aiders. Because often if you're delivering it, I mean, it's great that that head teacher is doing it and as staff are doing it together, which is great. But often in schools, it's just one person or two people because of budgets. So really important to make sure you're getting that support and finding other mental health first aiders. So we have an app, but also it's quite good to go back to the instructor that you trained with and see if there's any sort of support that they can provide just to have that continuous dialogue. Because often we do a training, it's great, and then we move on. So yeah. Yeah.
and back at school and whoa, yes,
Exactly. Go, go, go. Yeah.
yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you, Nicola. Any other useful tools or frameworks you wanted to mention?
Well, I would just, there's lots of different things out there. I would basically say, take time for you, like really, because I could list off lots of different evidence-based frameworks. There is a brilliant one called the search model. I mean, I'm going to be delivering some training on that later, but I would definitely say sit back and reflect. The PERMA model itself and the 7 ways of rest are really nice ways, but you could literally just sit back, map out each of those letters and do a personal reflection on each of those and see how it lands with you. I would also invest in training, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, particularly anti-racism training, and, really key that we're keeping the conversation going. Some schools that I've worked with, one of the schools in particular that I worked with, I delivered 2 2-hour twilight sessions in anti-racism training and linked to mental health. And then they called me back a few months later to work with the children. So they were all singing from the same hymn sheet. Because what I find, which was fantastic, and they were really invested, and they had, from the receptionist to the head teacher, it was compulsory for all staff. So I would say to schools to invest in good training, mental health, anti-racism, DEI training, but make sure the messaging is consistent across the whole staff team because it will impact the children. I used to get really frustrated when I would deliver a really nice piece of intervention in the classroom. Then that child would go out, interact with another member of this team or staff, and almost undo everything that I've done. I'm like, here we go again. So really keep the conversation going and embed this into your school environment.
Yes, and it's so important actually, isn't it, for I think all staff to have opportunities to access the training and the development. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if budgets are tight, if funding is tight, there's lots of stuff online. Obviously, professional CPD accredited training is key, but if you don't have access to that, there's lots of stuff online that you could read. And the methods that we've spoken about today, they can be a really good starting point. So yeah, and books as well, lots of good things. Yeah.
Yes, and that's a lovely segue, yes, to just the last thing I wanted to ask you, Nicola, was about any recommended reads or lessons. And I guess one of your recommended lessons, I'm sure, would be your podcast, the Mindful Wellbeing podcast, which I think people can find on Spotify and other platforms.
Yes, thank you, Bib. I'm always rubbish at plugging my own stuff, but you.
And yes, and then what else? Anything else you're listening to or would recommend for people to read, or something that's been inspiring you recently?
So some of the guests, I'm really lucky in the sense that I had some incredible guests on my podcast, and Dr. Poppy Gibson, who is a senior lecturer at the Open University and does loads of different things, and she's written quite a few books. Her recent book is Who Am I Teaching? And it's a nice read, and it just gets us to think about the young people in front of us, particularly in the primary classroom. So I love sort of that, just thinking about who our learners are and really coming from their lens. There's also my book as well. So I've got Mindful Little Yogis, which is targeted at teachers and parents, and it's more so based on mindfulness. So particularly for the children who've got special educational needs, and there's lots of different breathing activities and therapeutic things that they could do, but it also gives the therapeutic benefits of each. So this is targeted at teachers as well as parents to practice in their home environments and then work with children if it feels appropriate to do so. And the last book that I would say that I think might be a nice one to listen to or read is Trauma Informed Approach or Trauma Informed Schools by Shahana Knight. She's doing some incredible work, and again, a guest on my podcast. And she sort of uses an approach called a therapeutic classrooms. And there'll be an episode released in the next few weeks between myself and her on my podcast, actually highlighting that and unpacking that in more detail. Yeah, lots of different things. In terms of anti-racism, I would say How to Build an Anti-Racist Classroom is a good book as well. There's lots of different things out there, but I think doing your own research, I will have my own recommendations, things that I love, but I would definitely say do some research and really focus on making sure children feel seen and feel that they belong, but also teachers, because it starts with us. It really does start with us. And if we feel seen and we belong and we feel equipped with really good training and research that we've embodied, it does make a difference on the children and the community as a whole. So
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, and I really hope people take away just that encouragement that it's so important, so difficult in the hurly-burly of school, but taking time for you or to learn to understand a bit about what makes me as an individual feel okay is really something to take into the next school year. So thank you very much, Nicola, for sharing these strategies and your thoughts with us. It's been fantastic.
it's been great being here. Thank you so much for having me on board.